Welcome to the CR Dynamics podcast. I'm Chad Rauch, operations leader, founder, and someone who believes that the best operators are the ones who can connect the dots most people never see are even on the same page. Today's guest has spent 35 years proving that animal health and human health are not separate problems. They're the same problem looked at two different angles. Albert Dio is the co-founder, president, and Chief Innovation Officer of One Health Group. He has held senior roles at Siemens Medical, Philips Medical, Welch Allyn, Honeywell Aerospace, and General Dynamics. He has over 100 plus patents to his name. He sat on the inaugural National Biodefense Science Board under two administrations, helping the country prepare for chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological threats that nobody wants to think about. Now he's building the One Health Group around a single thesis. The animal biometric data collected at scale and analyzed with the right tools is in the front line of human health. Today we're going to talk about what that thesis is, the technology that makes it possible, what it actually takes to validate something genuinely novel inside healthcare, and how you build a company that executes against two different markets without one becoming a distraction from the other. Al, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chad. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So we're going to jump right into this and mention you built the One Health thesis into a company name itself. How does thinking about animal health and human health as a connected system change the architect, the technology, the go-to-market, and the long-term roadmap? Think of it from a foundation. How do you start that?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you mentioned early on, the animal health and human health are intrinsically linked. And if you think about it, we share about 70% of our chronic diseases, animals and humans. About 7 out of every 10 infectious diseases that animals get, they make a leap to human, and those are zoonotic diseases. So when you think of things like swine flu, or you might think of rabies, HIV, and so forth. And then there's also an environmental component. And what I mean by that is you start to think about diseases that are vector-borne diseases. And those are things that come from like mosquitoes, ticks, fleas, and the
Interesting.
like. So you think of malaria.
Yep.
The mosquito is the vector. And of course, now in the United States, there's a lot going on related to Lyme's disease. And in that case, the tick is the vector. And so what we've done is we've taken that holistic approach at One Health Group to say, look, all these are interrelated and they all, new findings can benefit one another. So from the get-go, we've worked with animal and human health professionals to see what the pain points are. So it wasn't a bunch of like scientists and technologists just coming up with something and go, now let's try to find a home. We were working to solve those real world problems. And we did that with a number of players. We've gone out to over 2,000 different animal and human health people to get inputs, and also globally. It's not just a US situation. And that helped inform what we needed to design and what we needed to create in order to address animal problems, human problems in the health and wellness space. And so that's really a whole mantra. Now, I will say to part of your question, we are leading with animal health first. And in a lot of respects, it's a more complicated problem. When you think about the number of the species and breeds of animals as well as mixed breeds, and then you also think about, oh, they have different fur, different ear canals,
Mhm.
nasal passages, the heart rates are different, so there's huge variety. Human is actually easier, but it's a little more challenging from the regulatory pathway, right? There's a lot more to prove out. So again, we've taken this approach in building the company, the type of people we hire, creating the solution. Our go-to-market is really, again, intrinsically linked. What we do for the animal, we're going to be able to do for the human, but ultimately we marry the data sets across those two in order to come up with new predictive health findings, you might say, true personalized health for the animal or human.
Interesting. Now you mentioned on that kind of that explanation there, the variables when you're dealing with the animal kingdom. We'll put it
Yeah.
in that context. The fur size, the ear canals, and has that and I just made up that word, but that those variables in there and having to deal with those so early on, helping you prepare when we get into the human market? No, granted, you said the regulatory is the more complexity versus the human patient, but does those early struggles or challenges with the variables help you kind of set yourself up for success down the road?
So whether you're talking about a cat, a dog, a horse, a cow, whatever the case may be, a lot of the ways that we collect the vital signs data, the health data, is really the same. What typically changes is the contextual information. So a horse moves different than a cat that moves different than a human. And so you can take those things into account. And, so that's where some of the uniqueness comes in. But me taking your blood pressure versus me taking the blood pressure off of an animal, it's going to be pretty much the same algorithms, though there may be different trigger points for alerts. A human blood pressure for a male, let's say age, 40, whatever the case may be, is going to be, sort of one particular comfort zone or health zone. Whereas you go to take it on an elephant, it's going to be something different. Our heart rates and
Yeah.
rest rates are going to be different than that of a mouse. But
Hmm.
really, the way we collect that data stays the same. So that's where it makes it possible to collect this really big data and to apply algorithms to it. You sort of register the data, you fuse the data, and then you can come up with new learnings from that data depending upon the sophistication of your algorithms.
Oh, you meant, I mean, data is a lot. Obviously, there's a
Yeah.
lot of data points that you're dealing with in there. Once you gather that data pool and you're sitting there and analyzing it, what are the tools and tricks that you're using at these early stages to help refine your process to get that finished product?
Yeah, it's a great question. Just to set the stage, we collect almost 3 billion samples a second from our data acquisition node, and that would be anatomical, functional, contextual, and physiologic information. On top of that, we apply stochastic processing. We apply what you might say fuzzy mathematics, determining things that are on sort of the edge, which way should a particular pattern move. And then we use a very sophisticated approach via neural networks. I can't go into the specifics of that because we keep
Hmm.
that as a trade secret. But there's a number of ways that we manipulate that data. We mine that data. We also make sure that our algorithms are constantly learning. So let's say the more we get of this species, of this breed, with certain health conditions or certain demographics, it continues to make the algorithm smarter and smarter and much more capable in what we provide. Some of the other tools too is we do save all the raw data as well as we pre-process the data before it goes to be
Okay.
manipulated by some of those algorithms. Focus our work related to a disease state. So let's say, it's something to do with the liver or kidneys or heart. And so we try to make sure that our work is focused. We're not trying to be the do everything for everybody all at once, but it's very exciting. We also do some processing on the sensor as well as we do some in the cloud.
Okay.
And probably just as much, I know a lot of times we have a tendency to focus on the hardware because you can see the sensor, it's something
Yeah.
physical. But there's a lot that's going on in the firmware that's embedded in that, and there's a
Okay.
lot going on in the cloud as well as on a mobile app because we can go to a mobile app cloud, which can also go to your laptop, desk side system, and so forth. So what I can tell you is there's probably a half dozen plus approaches we take in refining that data to make sure it is clinically accurate and clinically actionable. One other point I'll make is that we compare to industry gold standards. So we
Okay.
don't put something out if it's not going to be usable by the clinician. So for instance, in blood pressure, the platinum standard you might want to say is an arterial line, right? Which should be very accurate. It's in the bloodstream. And so we would look to compare, are we as good as that arterial line? And can we even be better? So, for instance, we're not invasive, we're non contact. We can have more motion. Well, you got an arterial line and you're not going to be doing, having a lot of motion. So we look to constantly provide the clinician and the patient, the one who's benefiting from that, what they need to, have a healthier life, a better life, better clinical outcomes, reduce costs, and more.
No, interesting. I mean, you said 3 billion a second or every 3 seconds. That is a staggering amount of bytes.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I mean, you must have exceeded your Chat GTP free version like in the first second. I mean, there's no way you can store all that to analyze that. But no, I mean, it's kind of like you said, you frame it around what the problem is. So you're not, it's there, but you're not focusing on it. So you're already walking into something that you kind of have an idea what you're looking for based on evaluations, and then the tool, the software, the
Yeah,
hardware is
yeah,
just becomes a recorder standpoint. So it's a great combination of both practical
yeah.
and kind of theoretical, I guess, in a sense that you're helping the diagnosis with the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, when we collect that data, one thing to keep in mind, it's not like image data. So when you think of
Mm.
video data, it's huge.
Oh
When
yeah.
you start having now, so for us, we're actually collecting motion data. We're collecting slices into the body as well, 256 slices, and we're collecting reflected signal information from every part of the body, whether it's, fat, a muscle, it's an organ, whatever the case may be. So when you think about it, it's almost more tabular sort of data, something you might populate an Excel spreadsheet with versus I'm pulling in terabytes of information. Now, don't get me wrong, in the cloud, we save everything because we
Yeah.
continue to use that to refine it. But that data that we pull in, we present it graphically to the user, the professional, so that they don't have to drill down into all the minutia. They can if they
Mhm.
want to, but we'll present it graphically and also some things numerically, blood pressure, systolic,
Yeah.
diastolic, mean arterial pressure, so numbers like that, but not the whole, 3 billion samples.
It kind of reminds me of the Matrix when Neo's just seeing the ones and zeros just populate everywhere, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden it turns into that the world that he's living in. But no,
yeah,
that's a great way of handling that. So kind of looking ahead, before you started the One Health Group, you
yeah,
sat on a National Biodefense Science Board. There was 13 people responsible for predicting chemical, biological, nuclear, kind of all the national disasters and threats
yeah,
before they'd happen. That's kind of forward thinking, protecting yourself in the current state. How did that teach you how to work with this big data that we've been talking about, how to handle all that, and then how the predictions and how that leads you into where you're at today, that early
yeah.
set in your career?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say those other 12 people were some of the best I've ever worked with. One health group team, don't get me wrong, is outstanding, but these were all
Stopping the
ex
threat.
I mean, different focus area, but these were all on the biodefense, were all experts in their particular fields that they brought to the biodefense. On top of that, we had about 50 ex officios. So there was people from the intelligence community, from Health and Human Services and a National Science Foundation and so forth that we could also tap into. And so what we were responsible for, as you said, is to keep the public safe from CBRN threats. And what we would do is have, like, one of my areas was predicting events and then trying to prevent those events. Not that I would be out in the field, preventing them, but it would be
Yeah.
the intelligence community. And then if there's a diagnostic that needed to be leveraged because there was something that occurred, what might that diagnostic be? And then there was others on the team that focused on medical countermeasures, infrastructure, the legality of things, and so forth. So it was a very humbling experience. It was a very honoring experience to be there. So that what that taught me is, again, the data sets are very big and the data sets are very diverse. And why I say it's bigger, than what anything we're dealing with and much more diverse is because you're taking in multiple variables. Not only would you get, okay, what's happening in health across the world, across the globe? Is there
Hmm.
a particular virus going on or whatever the case may be? or do you detect a chemical threat, a biological threat, or so forth? But then there's, things that come from satellites. There's things that come from sources on the internet. There's actually intelligence data that comes in. So there's, what's going on environmentally. So it's almost dizzying when you think of the number of variables that you have to take into account. What I'll say is things like nuclear related threats are much easier to track than a biologic threat. Chemicals are also easier to track than a biologic threat. Everybody worries about, what a nuclear bomb would do, and I'm not trying to downplay it, but when you think of what a biologic threat can do, it can be quite extreme. So that taught us to look at all this disparate data and process it in a way to come up with with the threats. The other point I'll mention, at the same time that was going on, I was the principal investigator on the U.S. Army Personal Status Monitor, which was about monitoring war fighters in theater and their health. And if something happened to them, well, first of all, were they capable to go on the mission? Were they healthy enough? If they did and something occurred on that mission, triaging their health without anybody else necessarily being around. And then that would help determine, who do I have to get out of theater first? What do I need to bring into theater to help stabilize them, or is there something already there? So that was some novel sensor and communications technology. So now in One Health, where we're at today, it's really marrying some of that National Biodefense Science Board work with the personal status monitor sensor work now to culminate in what we're doing in One Health Group, and we've continued to advance it.
No, that's kind of interesting. You mentioned that, nuclear and chemical are the spicy words, you can say, kind of when it comes to those threats. But the one that we live day in and day out, you can hear it on the news all the time. Yeah. Antivirus is back in the news, kind of more prevalent. I wonder why, with some ship that's been out to sea for many years, many days. But you have the Ebola, kind of those type of things. COVID, not to mention those, those type of things. So it's good that we're looking at different things. You bring up the data and how the data kind of helps make decisions, which then leads to the technology that kind of is kind of where you're at now, that you've grown on since your time there. And then you ran a study at Cornell where the platform predicted the onset of, and I'm going to mess this word up because there's a lot more syllables in there, osteoarthritis. Yeah. Almost a year before symptoms actually showed up. Yeah. Now that's kind of using data in the right way. Can you walk me through what makes that possible? How do you see something a year in advance before somebody even knows it exists?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add a little bit of flavor to that, so I think there was 40 canines in that study, which is not a statistically significant sample, but it's nonetheless reasonable. And a lot of those were also focused on heart rate, rest rate, and other things that we were measuring. But to coincide with that, and I can't say who because it's under confidentiality, but we were working with another strategic, an animal health strategic, a much larger sample size that was related to a new osteoarthritis drug. And so what the reason we could help in identifying that is because our technology, you remember when I was talking about context? Well, a dog moves, and you can base it on species, breed, age, weight, sex, and so forth, moves a particular way. Well, now when you start to see patterns change in their normal movement regime, you have a baseline, and now their regime has all of a sudden changed. Maybe they have a gait that is not quite right. Maybe it's something you can't see, but the sensor can. It can detect that gait that's off. The other thing that can happen is you see changes in patterns, such as they might be sleeping in a different location because they want to be in the sun or someplace that's warmer by a heating vent or something, and they're laying on the side where maybe their hip is giving them that issue or the legs giving them issue. And then you can also see, changes in patterns, behavior patterns. So maybe before they get ready to stand up, let's say they were laying down and move, take a step, or maybe go upstairs, and you see that there's a hesitation. And then when they do make that move, all of a sudden you can start to see, for example, spikes in their heart rate and rest rate. So they're experiencing some pain. And at some point you'll be able to, totally quantify that pain. And so you take a lot of this information in, and it paints a really different picture. You have a baseline on the animal. Now you see the animal changing over time. The reason it's so significant that we were almost a year in advance, you could prescribe that animal the pharmaceutical way in advance of the symptoms manifesting themselves. So we were actually picking them up before their owners knew that the animal had anything going on because they couldn't identify the signs. Animals are very good at masking pain
That,
and stress and things of that nature.
mhm.
So a lot of times you don't even know it's happening. What you can't see with your eye, the sensor can determine. So hopefully that answered your question, Chad.
No, it does, and it kind of just it kind of goes back to the subtle things that data can spot out,
Yeah.
compounded over time. We talked on the initial call about the personalness of my dog that had the same situation. An elderly dog didn't realize it. Every now and then they get their happy moment. You think, oh, he's a puppy again.
Yeah.
17 years later, he's not. You realize that. But when somebody else, an outsider, the vet in this case, could see the struggles and pain
Yeah.
walking into it, something you don't realize. But if there was that device out there, something that you can definitely see, the spikes along the way and kind of
All
predict it.
right.
So that's excellent technology there.
Oh, thank you.
So, without getting into the magic behind what it does, what does the capability mean for the vet on a Monday? So they have all this data. What are they, are they going to see the happy face, thinking in you're at your pediatrician's office on a scale of 1 to 10, what does your face look like? Is that what the vets see on Monday morning about your dog?
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's a great question. Well, let's say your animal does have a sensor on them. Maybe they went to the vet and the vet is saying, thinks something's going on, or maybe it's to monitor a chronic disease, or maybe it's even post-surgery. So that sensor, whenever the vet wants to, they have 24/7 access to it. They can pull up a dashboard that has multiple animals on it, or they can just focus on one animal. And in that dashboard, it will, list the name, the patient ID, and all sort of that demographics information. And then it'll list or graphically it shows, is it normal? Everything's fine.
Mhm.
They're trending towards a bad scenario, or hey, the bad scenario's there. Now, if the bad scenario's there and they had alerts on, they would have received a trigger on that. Equally as important, the pet parent would have a mobile app. So take your dog's situation. The vet could call it up on the dashboard and look and see, oh, this is how they're performing. Everything's looking good. Their recovery's going fine. Or they could call you and say, you should probably get your dog in here because we see something we don't like, we think needs to be looked at. But by the same token, on your mobile phone, you would have an app, not that goes into the details that the veterinarian gets, but that would say, hey, everything's fine. The health state of the animal's fine. No reason to be concerned. Oh, you're trending in a different direction. Try to keep your animal calmer. Maybe it was post-surgery and you didn't want them up and running around yet. So we try to put the information in the hand of those who both are responsible for the animal as well as the professional. The beauty is we give them what we say is actionable data. We don't make the decision for the clinician. Obviously, they make the final decision. We can provide the information and point them in certain directions, but they make the final decision. So we put the power in their hands to monitor that animal in their natural setting, which they just couldn't do before. And you as a pet parent, that was left on you. Well, look for any abnormalities or whatnot. Now you can have that sensor along with you, do both. So it makes their lives easier. It creates communications points through the pet parent, from the pet parent and the vet, right? It gives them better communication. No special training is required on either end, the professional end or the pet parent's end. And it really does increase workflow efficiency, in addition to things like the quality of clinical outcomes and so forth, hopefully improve life. Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't see how it can't. In all reality, if you got two set of people looking at data points or conditions, somebody should recognize that. I see it no different than you're talking to your nurse through your health app now,
Yeah.
that virtual call. So it's the same thing going the same way. The only difference is that's probably a little bit more reactive in a
Mhm.
sense,
Yeah.
today's world, because it's wait, tell the nurse that you got a problem, then
Yeah.
they get back to you. Maybe you got labs coming in and you're waiting for the results, but you're
Yeah.
not seeing that in a real time standpoint. The
Yeah.
product you're talking about here is real time.
Yeah, you would get it in real time, and it's also personalized, right? Instead of this, cocktail, oh, we're sort of lumping everything together in one for, across breeds, across species, and so forth. We
Mhm.
actually make it so it is personalized for your animal. And that same thing would apply to human. It's true personalized medicine, because today when you think of personalized medicine, you usually think of cancer therapy related stuff. What we're saying is think of health in the broadest
Mhm.
sense, and we're really looking to provide that personalized health and wellness at the individual level.
No, I think that's the next evolution. I think I've heard it in the past where they're saying it's the proactive care
Yeah,
movement. It's like stop treating the symptoms
yeah,
and let's get to the root cause. How do you get to the root cause before it becomes the big cancer moment
right.
is predictability,
Yeah,
having that kind of
absolutely.
continuous. So, I mean, it sounds like you're definitely in the forefront. So the animal health is in market now, correct?
No, I wish it was. So we've had over 2,000
Okay.
units out there with pet parents as well as professionals, and that really helped inform. We've done 3 iterations to collect this clinical data to help determine the go-to-market and so forth. And now what we've done is we've taken all of those learnings and we're working on our final go-to-market version, which is
Okay.
only weighs and outs. It's non-contact, so it can be on the animal, collar or harness, but it could also be embedded in the environment. So we can be 2, 3 feet away from the animal and get the information. So, we're pretty excited about that. It will not be on the market. We're saying Q1 2027. We're hoping to roll it out at a couple big veterinary shows that typically take place in the US in January and February. And, for us, we're an early stage company. Everything is gated based on the investment that we receive, right? So it's, we're continuing down that path, and we're taking it in a milestone sort of approach. We have 4 milestones, but we're looking to be in production Q1 2027. It's possible it's sooner, but that's what we've set as the stake in the ground.
What's that? Over promise on no. I always get it backwards.
Under promise, over deliver.
Yeah, thank you. I'm like every time I say it, it never comes out right. But no, I mean every plan, every strategy you have, you kind of have that. You want to be not time constrained. You want to be realistic in your release standpoint.
Right.
Obviously, things can go get better, but that's a great strategy. You don't want to. So then everybody's waiting for October of Q1 of 2027, January 1st. They're like, where's it at? And
Yeah.
it's like, so no, that's a great strategy you have. But with that so far, 27, that's actually pretty around the corner.
Right.
The human aspect of that, you're saying it's going to come out how much farther after that if they're kind of being in development at the same time?
Yeah, so the human would probably come out 18 months to 2 years after that, because we have to make sure we're following the FDA design controls, and we're
Hmm.
doing everything required from a regulatory standpoint. And then just like in Europe, CE marking is required.
Hmm.
So there's just steps that we have to go through and to ensure that we're proven as safe and effective. Now, what I can tell you, the animal studies do help in that. We've also already done 2 human-related studies, which again will help in that. It's the same platform technology, which is wonderful and may even help us get to, the human side of the equation quicker. What we're striving for is we would take the revenues generated by the animal solution to fund the human solution. The other thing I do want to mention is that the technology is very safe. We did a safety study and efficacy study and on human babies in the womb that published in the Health Physics Journal, and it
Interesting.
showed that we only put about 1/500th the energy into the body that your smartphone does. So it's incredibly safe. It's not radiation, it's actually a small part of the 5G spectrum that we
Okay.
leverage to get the data, and then we have other sensors that we use as well. So we see the human application coming shortly thereafter. I think the greatest challenge, Chad, is what is the human market we want to go for first? Because in animal, we said, okay, it's veterinarians, it's
Yeah.
cats and dogs. and then we'll expand into other species from there. With human, do we want it to be in a surgery suite? Do we want it to be in frontline care? Is it going to be a consumer version? Oh, something that every consumer can take home. Is it in a NICU or a burn ward? There's just so many applications. So we would really need to try to hone in what we want to release to first. So we'll look at where the biggest demand is.
So you're going to be competing against the Apple Watch. I see it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So obviously Apple's a great product,
Yeah.
and a great company. And so, the difference is, could we be in a watch? Certainly. But I don't want to mislead anybody who's listening to your podcast. So our sensor is, well, I don't know if anybody will be able to see it, but it's very small and very light. And that sensor puts out a beam that's shaped like an ice cream cone. So close into the sensor, it's narrower, the further away, it's wider. But of course, the further out you get, of course, the signal strength dissipates.
Yeah.
And then you have the return trip of the reflected signal. So if you're on the arm, on the wrist, you could get heart rate, rest rate, heart rate variability. You can get some contextual measurements and so forth. You could potentially get blood pressure as well. However, if you wanted to start looking at lung fluids, heart wall motion, heart volume, ejection fraction, cardiac volume, things of that nature, you're going to need to be close to that region of the body where you want to, interrogate using this technology.
You mentioned kind of in the pre-call about this technology and how you send is a sensor. Kind of people can walk through the door and get all their readings. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So let's say you're going to your, internist for your annual health visits, checkup, and you would walk in, let's say, how they'll take you back to the exam room and they'll go in there and typically maybe take your weight, take your height, temperature, SpO2, your blood pressure, but it's probably a nurse in there or a nurse practitioner, and they're physically touching you and taking that information. Well, now imagine you walk in and this sensor's mounted on the wall somewhere, it's mounted on a desk, wherever the case may be. You walk in, you sit down on the exam table, and it's collecting all that without you having to do a thing. And it's collecting that without there having to be the professional in the room. Now, if they think there's something anomalous, they may want to say, well, let me double check this with another piece of equipment. But, that shouldn't have to be the case. Just like when they take your blood pressure, they would like to have you stay still. They would like to, not have you talking and so forth. We don't really care. I mean, it doesn't mean you could be doing jumping jacks in the exam room, but
throw that scale way out of whack.
yeah, that's it. But so yeah, that's the goal. Or picture something that's really extreme. A NICU. You've got a premature baby in an incubator that has sensors on their body, which is not, their skin is already so sensitive, they're already so constrained. So now imagine this sensor is just on the side of the incubator and it's making it with nothing having to be on the baby. Now, I'm not saying the baby they might be on a respirator or something like that. There's nothing we can do there. But as far as diagnostics, we could be collecting that information without the baby having the discomfort of leads or anything on their skin.
No, that's great. And I can also see how it's a time-saving standpoint for anybody in the doctor's visit or the INCU or kind of wherever it's at.
Yeah.
Because you're not taking it from, you can feed that directly into the patient profile.
Right.
But the other thing is, I got to get this for my son so he doesn't say, oh, Dad, I got a fever in the morning as he puts the thermometer underneath the water. And next thing you know, it's like, wait a second, dude, hold on. That's the validation we're talking about with the walking in the anomaly. Like, wait, why you gotta, but I can see how there's a lot of operational streamlining effect that can take place in this, as well as the predictability behind it.
Right.
So I think it's definitely a great product. Now, kind of going into this, the One Health Group is your fifth startup, right? So you've not the first rodeo you've been down, but kind of we'll call it the best one by far. The early ones include a company that ran out halfway in the .com bust, right?
Right.
What does that experience change about how you're building in the scale for OHG?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, during the .com era, though this wasn't a .com company that I was part of, there was such a ripple effect. I mean, money really dried up. And at that time, I was doing some consumer-oriented products. One did have a health component to it, but the investor landscape really dried up. And so I think with One Health Group, there's been some differences. Number one, myself and one other co-founder, we put combined close to $4 million in to get the company started ourselves. Well, back in some of those earlier ones, I didn't have the luxury of doing that. So it was, great to be able to kick off the company on our own dime, right? And it also shows to other investors that you totally believe in what you're doing. You're committed. And then I think that we took it as far as we could, and then we went out for seed round funding, and now we're doing our Series A. Some of the big differences are with the first two startups, they were heavily funded by strategics. And so very deep pockets, something they wanted. A third was the bust, the .com, and the fourth was actually funded by a spin out from another strategic, and also received a number of grants and so forth. I think the thing here is that we're trying to do is be a little bit more balanced, and I will say reserved. We have done, and when I say we, I mean the One Health Group team, considerably more on less money than the previous startups. The other thing that I've learned is move every part of the business forward. We typically focus on the product or the technology, whatever the case may be, but we forget as that progresses, you've got to have everything else in place, unless you're just planning to sell it off or license it out, because you've got to have all aspects of the business ready to go. So we're doing that. We're having every aspect of the business ready to go. So when the solution's ready for market, everything else is in place and we don't have those delays. So I think that's another learning that's come into place. I think we're also a little bit more reserved. The team is an incredible team, highly diverse in their area of expertise. And so everybody can chip in a number of different areas. I'm not saying there's not challenges. The number one challenge, and please forgive me for sounding like a broken record, is typically it is for most early stage companies is funding, right? Yeah. And so it's a challenging landscape. And thank God we've been working through that. We're also pursuing some non-dilutive sources like grants. We're excited, but I think there was a lot of learnings from those earlier ones that have helped us in, setting the foundation here, and what are the things that we've had to look out for. And probably the last thing is we've also learned that there's areas to pivot. When we first thought we were going to go strictly consumer, through those early studies that we did, we found out, no, that's not the right market to do the introduction of voice, which is the product, into the market. It was really the professional community for just a variety of reasons. So we've learned to adapt. We've learned to plan for risk, have secondary solutions to those risks. We've learned to bring great partners alongside, collaborators, and we're excited about what the future is. To your point, this is probably the biggest potential product of any of the other ones I've worked on, and I've brought over 100 medical products to market, and this by far is, I think, the most significant.
I would have to agree with what your assessment is there. I mean, just from an outsider looking in, how we can benefit, two different species in a sense, an animal kingdom. Yeah. Can't wait till you get it for my little leopard gecko for my daughter. Then she can let it know, like she get the alert on her phone, like it's hungry, go feed it. I'm sick of doing it. But I mean, it branches off into a lot of bigger things. But, from an operational standpoint, having the commonality where you can have it single service, one thing, but then branch out without really changing how the product is used, yeah, is great kind of foresight in a sense that it allows more opportunities down the road.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even think, we've been talking a lot about the directly to the animal. Think about other solutions where there's a new pharmaceutical perhaps that's being made. And our technology could be the diagnostic that's deployed to show that particular pharmaceutical or biologic, topical, whatever it may be, is really achieving the results that they're hoping to achieve. Because, a lot of times you can't tell things in clinic. You can't
Hmm.
tell things in a particular study. But now, if that population is out in their normal places where they typically live and reside and so forth, you can now help in bringing those types of solutions to market quicker with a known diagnostic that allows it to take place. So, because of the big data again that's involved, you can show that something is truly efficacious and safe and so forth. So there's a lot of different applications beyond the very, specific ones that we've been talking about.
No, that's a good point. I think if you're trying to go to market with something and you have a tool that can give you objective data points,
Yeah.
the traditional model, correct me if I'm wrong, has been how are you feeling today? What's your survey?
Yeah.
What's the post-mortem, not post-mortem, but that post, therapy session vital signs.
Yeah.
Well, is that how you feeling because you're stressed out getting into there because you had a traffic jam and now your blood pressure's high, or is it the pharmaceutical that's leading that? But if you
Right.
don't have that, you're looking at a point in time
Yeah.
without under knowing the full circumstances behind it, where the technology you're developing is ongoing.
Yeah,
That kind of,
absolutely. And we timestamp everything. So you would
mm,
know exactly when that particular data was collected. And by the way, because of the contextual data, you would know what the animal was doing the time that data was, the other vital signs data was collected.
yeah, no, I think that's, I mean, it's the stepping stone. I think the next thing you're gonna come out is that tricorder for the Star Trek fans out there that is just gonna beep, 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 you're gonna be all set, and next thing you know, you'll drive through your iPass, your blood pressure's taken, your prescriptions will be at the next exit when you get off to fill up. I mean, it's all coming real time. We're thinking the future as we go. So
Yeah.
before I go, I got one last question to ask you, and it's gonna throw you for a loop. It wasn't in the packet, but what was your favorite Batman movie?
Oh, oh gosh. I really like the Batman animated stuff. So while I've seen the Batman movies,
Okay.
human ones, my favorite, or I'll have to say one of my favorites is Mask of the Phantasm, which is a Batman animated movie.
Okay.
So I love the Batman animated series when it was on back in, oh gosh, the 90s and probably early 2000. And I love Beyond Batman. But I'd say check out Batman, The Mask of the Phantasm. That's one I like.
I will have to say that the Batman animated movies, I was shocked at the adultness in them.
Yeah, the
You
newer
know,
ones are. Yeah, yeah,
they
definitely.
definitely are. But no, Batman, the animated series back in the 90s or whenever that was out, that was my get home from school. I'll admit it. I was still high schooler, and I'm like, ooh, I gotta get home. I think it was on the WB or whatever it was. I gotta
Yeah,
watch that when you
yeah,
get
that's
home.
right.
It
Yeah, I used
was
to
one of
sit
those.
down and watch that with my kids. So that goes to show how old I am. But I love, I really like the graphic novels. You're right. Some of the newer ones, the last couple newer animated ones have been more adult in content, not like extreme,
Oh,
but
but yeah, it's not
certainly more
something you'd see on
mature.
a Saturday morning cartoon. It's like, whoa, but no, and you brought up Batman Beyond. I mean, that was another great one that kind of got lost off in the
I
time
agree.
zone there. But hopefully they bring something back. But Al, I have to say this has been generally a useful conversation. I love the conversation. Hope it was good
Thank
for you. But I want to reflect back a little bit on kind of some takeaways
you.
from this. One is home health is not a marketing frame. It's the public health reality.
Yeah.
The 70% of the chronic diseases also show up in animals. 7 out of 10 infectious diseases come from them. If you're not collecting and connecting the data, you are missing the front line. So we talked a lot about how that big data comes into play. Second, the validation is the moat. We talked about that. The
Yeah.
anyone can build a sensor, but what separates a platform from a gadget is the discipline to validate every single measurement against the existing clinical standards. You mentioned how you take that and you're benchmarking it. You have the silver platforms, you have the gold standards, the
Yeah.
platinum standards, and then you refuse to ship it until it clears. You're making sure it's refined. It's
Yeah.
not first to market, it's best to market, right? You're leading the way, get it right the first time.
Yeah.
That right there is operational vigor expressed in kind of product strategy. So you're kind of combining the right ways. Do it right the first time, quality before quantity in a sense. Third, building two markets at once is not doing more. It's about choosing what to do first and building the operating discipline that one funds the other. So you're leading with one that's going to build in the other, and that's being honest about the regulatory delta. Animal health is this easier stepping stone, but you said yourself, the data, the proof, it's there. Now it's just jumping into the human. Let the regulatory process take that way. But Al, appreciate everything today. It's been a great conversation. Appreciate learning about your favorite Batman movie on the end there. You know, we'll have to geek out on that sometime and share some stories and some Batman stories. But Al, really appreciate your time. Last note, kind of let us know where we can find you.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for that overview and the debrief. As far as where to find me, you could certainly look up Albert D. Rienzo on LinkedIn. You can email me at albert.drienzo@ohgcorp.com. You can come in through our website, through the contact page and info page. I'm the guy who responds to those. So that's something that you can do as well. Those are probably, the easiest.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Well, thanks again. And for everybody listening and watching, look out for Voice circa January 1st, 2027. It'll be on the market. Get your pets healthy and happy, and wait for the product to come down the road for yourself. So, Al, once again, appreciate the time today.
Thank
You
you.
take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Chad. You take
Okay.
care. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.